Hello, my friends. Welcome to Woven English. I am so glad you are here today. Find a comfortable place, take a slow breath, and let this story begin. Imagine a woman standing in a field 10,000 years ago, somewhere in the land we now call Turkey or Iran. The grass is dry and yellow. The sky is wide and hot. She is standing beside an animal, a large brown cow, and she is doing something that no human being has ever done before. She is taking milk from the cow, not for the cow's calf, but for herself. She does not know what will happen. She does not know if it will make her sick. She does not know if this is safe, dangerous, or wrong. She only knows that the calf drinks from its mother and grows strong, and she is hungry. The white liquid is there, and something inside her says, "Try." What happens next will change the history of the entire human race, because that moment, that single act of curiosity beside a cow in a dry field 10,000 years ago is the beginning of a story that reaches all the way to the glass of milk on your table this morning, and to the cheese in your sandwich, and to the butter melting on your bread. This is the story of milk, and it is stranger, older, and more important than almost anyone realizes. But first, you must understand something about the human body and milk. For most of human history, most adult humans could not digest milk properly. To digest means to break down food in your stomach so your body can use it. Milk contains a sugar called lactose, and to break down lactose, your body needs to produce an enzyme called lactase. An enzyme is a substance your body makes that helps it process certain foods. Babies produce lactase naturally because babies drink their mother's milk, but in most ancient humans, the body stopped producing lactase after childhood, after the age of weaning, which means the age when a baby stops drinking its mother's milk. So, if an ancient adult human drank cow's milk, they would likely feel very sick, stomach pain, bloating, and discomfort, because their body no longer had the tools to process it. And yet, humans began drinking milk from animals anyway. And this is where the story becomes remarkable. Around 10,000 years ago, in the region of the world called the Fertile Crescent, which includes parts of modern-day Turkey, Iraq, Iran, and Syria, humans began doing something that changed everything. They began domesticating animals. Domesticating means taming wild animals and keeping them to live alongside humans. Sheep, goats, and cattle were among the first animals that humans domesticated. And with those animals came their milk. The earliest evidence of humans using animal milk comes from pottery fragments found in Turkey and northern Africa. Dating back around 8,000 years, scientists found traces of milk fat inside the clay pots, which tells us that people were collecting, storing, and probably heating milk even 8,000 years ago. But there is a problem. Remember that most adult humans could not digest fresh milk without becoming sick. So, what were these early people doing with milk that they collected in pots? The answer is one of the greatest accidental discoveries in human history. They were making cheese and fermented products like yogurt. When milk sits for a period of time, bacteria naturally present in the milk and in the environment begin to break down the lactose, the milk sugar, and transform the milk into something different, into a thicker, sourer, more solid substance. In this process, most of the lactose disappears. So cheese, yogurt, and other fermented dairy products could be eaten by people who could not drink fresh milk without pain. Can you imagine it? Ancient people discovering completely by accident that old milk sitting in a clay pot had become something solid and sour and edible, and actually quite delicious. They had found a way to capture the nutrition of milk, the fat, the protein, the calcium, in a form that would not make them sick. Cheese may be 10,000 years old. Yogurt may be just as ancient, and they were not invented by clever scientists in laboratories. They were discovered by hungry people who looked at a pot of old milk and thought, "Let me taste this anyway." But then, something happened in human biology that changed the story again. In certain populations, particularly in Northern Europe, and in some parts of Africa and the Middle East, a genetic mutation began to spread through the population. A mutation is a change in the genetic code, the instructions inside your body that control how it works. This particular mutation caused adults to continue producing lactase, the enzyme that breaks down milk sugar even into adulthood, instead of stopping after childhood. This meant that certain people could now drink fresh milk as adults without becoming sick, and this was a significant advantage because milk is an extraordinarily nutritious liquid. It contains fat for energy, protein for building muscle, calcium for strong bones, and vitamins that are difficult to find in other foods. In environments where food was sometimes scarce, where harvests sometimes failed, and where hunting was sometimes poor, a group of people who could drink fresh milk from their animals had a powerful additional source of nutrition that other groups could not access. Scientists call this mutation lactase persistence because it means the ability to process lactose persists, continues into adulthood. In populations where this mutation appeared and spread, the people who carried it were healthier and more likely to survive and have children, and so the mutation spread further and further through those populations. Today, around 35% of the world's adult population can drink fresh milk comfortably, but that percentage is very unevenly distributed in northern European countries like Sweden, Norway, and Denmark. The percentage is extremely high. Around 90% of adults can digest milk in parts of East Asia and Southeast Asia. The percentage is much lower. Many adults in these regions still find fresh milk difficult to digest. This is not a problem or a weakness. It is simply a reflection of which populations historically kept dairy animals and which did not. The history of milk in Europe is deeply connected to the history of survival. The cold climate of Northern Europe meant that crops were unreliable. Milk from cattle provided a consistent source of food through long winters. Butter could be stored, cheese could be stored, and these stored dairy products kept families alive when nothing else was growing. In medieval Europe, cattle were extraordinarily valuable animals, not because of their meat, but because of their milk. A cow that produced milk was worth far more alive than dead. The great monasteries of medieval Europe produced and aged cheeses that were famous across entire regions. Monks in French and Italian monasteries developed the techniques that eventually became the great cheeses we still eat today. Parmesan cheese, which we put on pasta, was being made in northern Italy as early as the 13th century. Roquefort, the famous blue cheese from France, has records dating back to the 15th century. Cheddar cheese from England has been produced since at least the 12th century. These were not simply foods. They were technologies for storing nutrition for making the goodness of summer milk available through the cold and hungry months of winter. The story of milk is also the story of power and inequality. Throughout history, access to dairy animals was not equal. Cattle were expensive to keep and feed. A family that owned cattle had access to milk, butter, and cheese all year. A family that owned no cattle did not. The landed classes of medieval Europe ate dairy products regularly. The poor ate them rarely or not at all. In some cultures, cattle became a form of currency and a symbol of wealth. In parts of Africa and South Asia, cattle ownership still represents social status, and dairy animals are passed down through families as some of the most valued possessions a person can leave their children. Milk also became connected to national identity in ways that are still visible today. The Dutch became famous across Europe as master dairy farmers. The flat green lands of the Netherlands proved ideal for cattle, and the Dutch developed techniques for making butter and cheese that were copied across the continent. Dutch cheese, Gouda, Edam, and many others spread to every corner of the trading world, carried by Dutch merchants and ships. The Swiss developed their mountain cheese traditions, adapted to the particular conditions of alpine pastures, where cattle grazed in summer on rich, high-altitude grass and were brought down to the valleys in winter. Swiss cheese, with its famous holes, which are actually caused by specific bacteria releasing gas during aging, became one of the most recognized foods on earth. In India, the story of milk took a different direction entirely. Cows in Hinduism are sacred animals. They are not eaten, and they are treated with profound respect, but their milk is a central part of daily life and cooking. Ghee, which is clarified butter made by heating butter until the water evaporates and the milk solids separate, is one of the most important cooking fats in Indian cuisine. It has been used in cooking and in religious ceremonies for thousands of years. Paneer, a fresh cheese made by curdling heated milk with an acid like lemon juice, is a staple protein in vegetarian Indian cooking. These dairy traditions developed independently and produced a completely different set of foods from the European tradition. Yet they arose from the same fundamental discovery that the milk of domesticated animals was extraordinarily useful. Then came the 19th century and the Industrial Revolution. And for the first time, milk became something that could be produced, processed, and distributed at massive scale. And with that came a problem. Fresh milk spoils very quickly. It is a perfect environment for bacteria to grow, both harmless bacteria and dangerous ones, in the cities of 19th century Europe and America, where large numbers of people lived close together, and where dairy cattle were sometimes kept in terrible conditions in urban dairies. Milk became one of the most dangerous foods a person could consume particularly for children. In the 1800s, in large cities like New York and London, thousands of children died every year from drinking contaminated milk. Diseases like tuberculosis, typhoid fever, and scarlet fever could all be transmitted through milk. Doctors and public health officials were alarmed, but they did not yet have the scientific tools to fully understand what was happening or why. Then came a French scientist named Louis Pasteur. Pasteur was already one of the most important scientists of his era. He had developed what we call germ theory, the understanding that tiny, invisible living organisms, bacteria, could cause disease. This was not obvious to people at the time. Many still believed that disease came from bad air, an imbalance in the body, or divine punishment. Pasteur discovered that heating a liquid to a specific temperature for a specific period of time killed the harmful bacteria inside it without destroying the liquid itself. He tested this process first on wine and beer to prevent them from spoiling, and then others applied the same principle to milk. The process was named after him, pasteurization. To pasteurize means to heat a liquid to kill harmful bacteria and make it safe. This simple process of heating milk to around 72 degrees Celsius for 15 seconds and then rapidly cooling it transformed milk from one of the most dangerous foods in the city into one of the safest. Pasteurization was not immediately accepted everywhere. There was resistance from dairy farmers who worried about costs, from people who believed raw milk tasted better, and from those who simply distrusted the new science. But gradually, country by country, city by city, the evidence was too clear to ignore. Children stopped dying in the numbers they had before, and pasteurization became standard across the developed world. The 20th century brought further transformation to the story of milk. Homogenization is a process where the fat molecules in milk are broken into smaller particles, so they spread evenly through the liquid, instead of rising to the top as cream. This gave milk the uniform white appearance we recognize today. Before homogenization, milk would separate with a thick layer of cream, floating above the thinner white liquid below. Refrigeration changed milk completely as well. Before reliable refrigeration, milk could only travel short distances from farm to consumer. It had to be collected and used within hours. After refrigeration arrived, milk could be transported hundreds of kilometers, stored in homes for days, and sold in shops and supermarkets. And then came the bottles, then the cartons, then the plastic jugs, and then the milk in individual, tiny containers for children's lunchboxes, and then the ultra-heat treated milk in sealed boxes that could sit on a room temperature shelf for 6 months without spoiling. Each of these innovations a small step in the long journey that began with a woman standing in a field beside a cow 10,000 years ago. In the modern era, the story of milk has become more complicated and more interesting at the same time. For most of the 20th century, in Western countries, milk was considered simply and completely good for you. Governments promoted it, schools gave it to children. The slogan, "Drink milk it does," a body good became famous in the United States. Advertisements showed healthy, smiling people with white milk on their upper lips. Milk was associated with strength, growth, purity, and childhood. But in recent decades, the picture has become more nuanced, more complex. Scientists have questioned some of the strongest health claims made about milk. While dairy products remain excellent sources of calcium and protein, the idea that humans must drink cow's milk to be healthy has been challenged by research, showing that calcium can come from many other sources, and that for the large percentage of the world's population who cannot easily digest lactose, other sources of nutrition are not just acceptable, but preferable. At the same time, a new category of products has grown enormously: plant-based milks, soy milk, oat milk, almond milk, rice milk, and coconut milk. These are not milk in the biological sense. They do not come from animals, but they fill a similar role in cooking and drinking. They can be poured on cereal, used in coffee, and added to tea. For people who choose not to consume animal products, or who cannot digest lactose, they have become important parts of daily life. The rise of oat milk in particular has been remarkable, from a niche product to one of the most popular beverages in coffee shops. Across the world, in less than a decade, the Swedish company Oatly, which makes oat milk from Swedish oats, became one of the most recognizable food brands in the world, a story that would have seemed impossible 30 years ago. And yet, for all this change, for all the alternatives and the debates and the nutritional science, the simple fact remains that somewhere in the world right now, a child is drinking a glass of cold white milk and growing stronger. Somewhere else, a person is melting butter into a pan for their morning eggs. Somewhere else, a cheesemaker is turning a wheel of cheese in a cool cave, and the cheese has been aging there for a year, and when it is ready, it will be extraordinary. 10,000 years from a clay pot in the Fertile Crescent to oat milk in a coffee shop in Stockholm. That is the journey of something that began with a woman standing in a field, deciding to try. And so, my friends, the story of milk rests here for tonight. A story about curiosity, accident, the way human bodies change over generations, science and danger, and the quiet miracle of cheese aging in a cave. Now, I want to say something to you. The greatest discoveries in human history were often not made by scientists in laboratories. They were made by ordinary people who looked at something unfamiliar and decided to try, to taste, to experiment, and to ask, what happens if I do this? You are doing exactly that right now. Every time you press play on a story in a language that is not your own, you are the woman standing beside the cow. You are deciding to try something new, something that might feel strange at first, something your mind is not yet fully ready to process. But you keep going anyway, and slowly the strangeness becomes familiar, and the familiar becomes yours. Leave me a comment and tell me this. What is your favorite dairy product? Or, if you do not drink milk, what is your favorite plant-based alternative? I would love to know what people are drinking all over the world. Come back soon, my friend,